Welcome to the African News Review podcast, where we cut through the noise and get to the truth. I am your host, Adesoji Iginla, and each week we are here to challenge the biases, prejudices, and misinformation in the Western press about Africa. Using historical context and contemporary insights, we set the record straight and reclaim the narrative. Tune in every Sunday at 12 p.m. Eastern as we uncover the real stories and reshape the conversations about Africa. This is the African News Review podcast, reclaiming Africa's narrative, one story at a time. Yes, greetings.
Yeah.
Welcome again, as usual, to our weekly conversation about Africa in the Western press. I am your host, Adesoji Iginla. With me, as usual, is journalist, broadcaster, Comrade Milton Allimadi, whose book, again, I can't stress enough, Manufacturing Hate, how the continent was demonized in the Western media, is the motivation behind this show. Without further ado, brother Milton,
Yes, sir.
how's your week been?
Excellent. Always look forward to rendezvous on weekends.
Yes, same here. And it seems as if the ripples from your neck of the woods is still flowing into the African continent, as it normally does, but this time with some colonial feel to it. And for our first story, we go to your favorite newspaper, the New York Times. And what's the headline? The headline reads, surprise, surprise. Some Afrikaners cheer as Trump amplifies claims of persecution. It reads, an executive order from President Trump on Friday puts the weight of U.S. influence behind a hotly disputed claim in South Africa that Afrikaners were the victim of unjust racial discrimination. Do you want to say something before we go into it, or
Yes.
you want to hold fire?
No, it's good to catch them from the very beginning. I think the article itself, out of a 10, I might give it an 8.
Okay.
But you can't say nonsense like hotly disputed. Hotly disputed by whom? Think about it.
True. Yeah.
So that's completely nonsense. I don't even know what to say.
Okay, so we'll continue whilst you catch your breath. So it goes into, and the story is filed by John Elligon and Lindsay Chotto. And they look...
And, to be honest, I have to be very blunt here. When you do a story like this, you can't have two Europeans writing about a story like this.
Okay. But, the reporting was...
If I were the editor,
yeah,
and this is something that actually came up in my research in my book.
Okay.
Because I think it's toward the end, but I don't know if I used that quote. I may not have used it, but I interviewed, I think it was, his name is, last name is Kovac, and he used to be the curator of the Nieman Foundation for Journalism at Harvard. And when I interviewed him for my book, he said he used to read stories about South Africa. And then he started reading stories that were much more revealing, right?
Okay.
Including a New York Times reporter who was confronted by a European South Africa when she was working in the neighborhood where she lived. And she was asked if she was a maid and whom did she work for,
Interesting.
Because this was the Black reporter. I think she was one of the earliest Black reporters they started sending to South Africa.
Okay.
And he said, and this to me, this is him speaking, revealed the need to have diversity in terms of the types of journalists that we send to Africa. Because a white reporter would never have gotten a story like that. And the types of stories that she subsequently kept getting. And I don't remember who the reporter's name was. But I just say that in a case like this, now you see the need for it as well. I don't think, unless this is something that editors, just put in later on. It hardly disputed that,
a straightforward
a
story.
reporter, exactly, would not say, wait a minute, why are you saying this is hardly disputed? They own 70% of the land. They control the economy. They have the lowest unemployment levels in the country. How are they being discriminated and exploited? This is nothing that can be disputed. The facts are very clear. There's nothing subjective about it, you see? That's why I hotly oppose that comment.
You're a man of few words.
Right. But let's go ahead.
Yeah. So it reads, for decades, some members of the white Afrikaner minority have been trying to convince anyone and everyone who would listen that they were the true victims in post-apartheid South Africa. They have made claims of mass killings of their people and widespread land grabs by black-led government that they insist is seeking retribution for the sins of the Afrikaner-led apartheid government. Their stories have been false or greatly exaggerated, but has not stopped them from being widely amplified and repeated online. And it continues, Afrikaner, an ethnic group that descended from European, primarily Dutch colonizers, have found a champion for their cause in President Trump, and it has led to a moment that few of them could have imagined. Mr. Trump, on Friday, put the weight of the American influence behind a hotly disputed claim that the Afrikaners were the victims of unjust racial discrimination, issuing an executive order to allow them to migrate to the United States as refugees and halting aid to South Africa. Do you wish to comment?
The only thing that stands out once again is the hotly disputed. It should be the easily repudiated claim. That's how it should read. The reporters know that. The editors know that. So are they succumbing to fears of Donald Trump, fears of Elon Musk, fears of the sensitivity of these inheritance descendants of the racist apartheid system in South Africa? I can't figure it out.
Or it could be, yes, it's self-censorship in a way, but then the motivation is the key fact. What is the motivation?
No, it's a fear of reaction by some quarters. This is not a hotly disputed issue. That's complete nonsense. And they know it as well. By saying hotly disputed, you're actually giving it some legitimacy. Think about it. Right?
The story will break out the way
hotly disputed claim that Hitler was a dictator. Hello?
Or Pol Pot was a dictator.
They operated a Nazi-inspired regime in South Africa. How quickly we forget that, huh?
Yes,
and you're saying their claims are hotly disputed. Hello? So that reference alone ruins the entire article, is what I'm willing to say. Yeah.
The fact that you even give it...
That 1% destroys the 90+% or 99% in my...
The fact that you even give this sort of story, this amount of inches in a newspaper of New York Times reputation suggests what you alluded to in the first place, is this need to please someone.
No, actually the amount of space itself, I have no problem with. The content is what I have problems with. There are not enough South African Black people repudiating this in quotes and saying, I can't believe this. My great-great-grandfather was sent to some barren, remote lands in the Transkei, and our land was stolen. And, we've been suffering the legacy of this up to date. And now we have a white man at the White House, So the story could have been much, much more strong, in which case I would have no issue with the length of the story.
Oh.
But it comes back to what you just said. The length of the story and the fact that it was not done correctly does confirm what you just said, that it is giving it the false legitimacy.
Okay. I'll continue. And the move was met with dismay in South Africa. A majority black nation where more than 90% of the population comes from racial groups persecuted by the racist apartheid regime. These groups, black and a very offensive word to African Americans, colored, and Indian, remain statistically far behind the white minority in virtually every economic measure.
And you can't write a story like this without revealing that the blacks are the most marginalized, the most discriminated, and the most impoverished as well.
There have been gruesome murders of white farmers, the focus of the Afrikaners' grievances. But police statistics suggest that they account for a very small share of the country's killings. So are you saying the kid that cried wolf?
No, actually, this is actually where I kind of disagree with that. If you look at the numbers of European farmers killed, and this were the statistics that was widely available, there were actually many more in South Africa compared to in Zimbabwe.
Okay.
At the height of the land reforms in Zimbabwe.
Okay.
But at that time, their propaganda was that they did not want to report that in South Africa because it would inspire more pressure to have land reform in South Africa as well. So they actually hushed up and made it appear, it made it appear as if Zimbabwe was much more hostile and dangerous for the safety and well-being of European farmers. Anybody can go and look and do the research right now. I don't have the stats in front of me, but the numbers in South Africa compared to in Zimbabwe were exponentially higher. You see?
Okay.
But then if you reported that, you would have to break it down and explain why are they being killed.
What's the motivation? Yes.
You see, what is the motivation? The land disparity, disparity and all that. You would have to really focus on the story. But at that time, the propaganda was just focused on Zimbabwe and Mugabe. Zimbabwe and Mugabe. So in fact, don't blame the South Africans. Blame yourself for creating that dichotomy and that parameter, The same thing can be said for what is going on right now as we speak in Namibia. They're not covering the land issues in Namibia as well. This is unlike the story itself, right? Okay, let's go through it, and then I'll tell you what is really missing. So far, I've indicated what is missing in this story, but there's a lot more. And you'll see the true agenda behind a story like this.
Okay, for Afrikaners who make up 4% of the population, Mr. Trump's action was a culmination of years of international lobbying. What happened last night is probably the most significant international action on South Africa since 1994, when the apartheid regime lost power. Ernest Rost, the executive director of the Afrikaner Foundation, an advocacy group, said on Saturday, that's him there, we have done Go on.
So we are told that they're 4% of the population.
Yes.
Has he told you so far how much land they control?
No, we've not gotten there yet.
Has he told you so much how much of the economy that they control?
Nope.
So when you frame a story like this, then a reader can be left with the impression that it might be a hardly disputed issue. Because if you only throw 4% there, then you're drawing that narrative or image of, oh, this is such a small group surrounded by all these millions of hostile Africans, Complete BS. If there were hostile Africans, there would not be a single European in South Africa today, given the legacy of what they did to Africans,
Okay. Whoa. 4%.
Oh, really? They're too clever for their own good, but they don't realize there are Africans out there who are much more clever for their own good as well. Yeah.
Okay.
They're amazing, these people.
So, Mr. Rhodes, go on. We have done some things wrong, but every community has done some things wrong. Mr. Rhodes said of the Afrikaners. We've had
Think about that. That is a quote that the person willingly included in his article. You know that reporters go interview people for an hour or two. There's no way can you, because 5 newspaper pages would just go filled with what they said, correct?
Yeah.
Meaning every journalist, after doing the interview, select what they want to put in the article.
Correct.
And that was a quote selected by these reporters. We've done some wrong things.
Like what?
How many Africans were hung? How many Africans were killed in detention, including Steve Biko and many others? How many Africans were poisoned so that even after they released, they died within a few years, like Robert Sobukwe? How many Africans were massacred? The Soweto, Sharpeville, and many other massacres. How many Africans died in the mines to build the wealth that the father or the grandfather of this person being quoted is now saying in the New York Times?
You see?
That's why I'm telling you, a story like this, you cannot have it written just by Europeans. They do not have sufficient empathy, feeling, connection, and just sympathy for the Black experience, the African experience.
For humanity, for basic humanity.
It's not sufficient to say, oh, I'm liberal, I'm for equality for everybody. No, it doesn't work that way.
Labels. So he goes on and he says, we've done some things wrong, but every community has done some things wrong.
We've done something wrong. It's like you're driving and you took a wrong turn.
And
you went up a one-way street, That's what it sounds like.
And you course correct without any...
Very sick.
Yes. So we've had this sense of being scapegoated and blamed for everything. The fact that there is now a recognition is something I think a lot of people will welcome.
All
recognition of...
I don't even think we need to go further with a useless article like this. No, because the quote is conveying this amount of sympathy that the reporter has. Correct?
Correct, yeah. Yeah.
It's not the person interviewed who's sitting there writing the story and sending the final edited version to his editor at the New York Times. You see? Total lunatics,
You normally
Absolute lunatics.
You normally do say something that they tend to bury.
Or if you are going to go with a preposterous quote like that,
okay,
you're going to find an African who can easily demolish that quote and let it look as stupid as it is. I'm not South African. I'm sitting all the way here in D.C., but I would have been able to demolish that quote using factual examples like some of the things I just said. And I would have also said that this guy is speaking as if he's driving up a one-way street when he said we've done something wrong. You see?
As if he's talking to a child.
There you go.
There is, I think, someone agrees with you in the piece, and I highlighted it in green. Where is it? It's just about here. Yes. Melanie Vekvoort, a former ambassador to Ireland for South Africa, said the focus on Afrikaner rights inverted the history of a people who have benefited since the 17th century from land their ancestors took from Black people. She said she was speaking as a white person and as an Afrikaner, adding that it was categorically false that white South Africans were being persecuted. The vast majority of poor in this country remains Black people, said Ms. Vekvoort. If any group is being treated badly or if there is any human rights abuses to talk of, then in fact, the Blacks, not the whites.
Okay, so I like that quote, number one. Number two, look at the location of that quote relative to the entire story. And then the third point is that, quote, while good is not sufficient, we
Okay.
don't have enough African voices out there repudiating. So in fact, the article itself is practicing its own form of apartheid,
Wow.
whether conscious or unconscious, you know?
While I was reading it, one question kept coming across my mind, and the question was, does Trump's intervention here set the store for what would come in terms of other land question across the continent?
Say that again?
Does Trump's intervention in this case, I mean, just basically, rewriting, inverting the history, as the lady said, will that then form the bedrock of all future engagement with regards to the land question, which you alluded to in Namibia, still in Zimbabwe, in Kenya at some point, in Zambia? Okay.
Trump doesn't even care. This is Elon Musk. And Elon Musk cares about South Africa.
Okay.
That's where, his people are. So Trump is not interested, in Africa. I don't think he has any particular interest or knowledge of the African continent. That's sometimes, not bad either. Probably won't see the kind of wars for resource plunder that were actually occurring during the democratic administrations. You see? War against Libya was for resource plunder. They wanted the oil, and they went there. They threw out the baby with the bathwater, destroyed the entire country, right? And now nobody can get the oil.
Even they can't get the oil.
They can't get the oil. They created all these so-called jihadists, now pulverizing the entire region. Same thing in Congo, right? The legacy of the violence we are seeing today in the Congo, the continuation of something that actually was launched under Bill Clinton when he allowed Uganda to invade Rwanda in 1990. So we're talking 35 years of unleashed terror under democratic administration. You see? So Trump is only making that statement because of the guy
standing next to him.
Who is the boss. He's not even sitting next to Trump. He stands next to him like this in the White House, and his own son, how old is he? 4-year-old.
4-year-old.
Told Trump to shut up, which means occasionally, while the father is watching Trump on TV, the father probably tells him to shut up. And that's how the son must have picked it up. How does the 4-year-old pick up those kind of comments? So Trump does not have any particular interest in South Africa. But if Elon Musk says, say this, do that, he'll do it. The guy who has $400 billion in his control, he can get a lot of people to do a lot of things, including the President of the United States. You see?
And even his son
but
can
like I said before, I think he's giving a reason for the rebirth of radical politics, of nationalist politics, of Pan-African politics in South Africa. So this is a golden opportunity. It should not just be, Malema. Zuma is a senior citizen now, but he can still contribute some useful comments. But particularly the younger South Africans have to step up.
Yeah.
Because use this to articulate the kind of vision that we really need to see for future South Africa.
Speaking of interest, the Russians do have an interest, and specifically in Sudan. And for our next story, we go to The Guardian. It reads, Sudan says plans for first Russian naval base in Africa will go ahead. The lead reads, 2 countries' foreign ministers meet in Moscow and agree that there are no obstacles to long delay plan. It goes in further. A plan for Russia to establish its first naval base in Africa will go ahead, Sudan's foreign minister has confirmed, after years of delay over the Red Sea military ports. If the agreement is implemented, Russia will join US and China in the region. They have bases to the south in Djibouti. The announcement came during a visit by Foreign Minister Ali Suif Ahmad El-Shari to Moscow, where he met his Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov. After the meeting, Sharif said the two countries were in complete agreement on establishing a Russian base and there are no obstacles. Do you want to say something before I continue?
Well, it looks to me that the Russians, and I'm sure they have, the information and intelligence, I think they have come to the conclusion that the military is going to win this civil war. The Sudanese official army is going to win this civil war in the country. And perhaps they have been offered some inducements
to contribute to the effort.
To help them in securing the victory in this civil war. That's what this, I don't think you would be concluding the deal and wanting to deploy ships if you were under the impression that, this government would soon be collapsing, you see?
Okay. I'll continue. And it reads, the Red Sea is one of the world's most strategically important waterways, connecting the Suez Canal to the Indian Ocean. About 12% of the global trade passes through it. Sudan first floated the idea of allowing Russia to have a naval facility on its coast in 2017 during a trip to Sochi by Omar el-Bashir, the then president, who was ousted in a 2019 coup. A deal was eventually signed in 2020 that reportedly permitted Russia to keep up to 4 naval ships, including nuclear-powered ones, in Sudan for a period of 25 years.
Right. And
what
the
do
timing,
you read
of
into that?
course.
Yeah.
The timing is not by coincidence. I think it was not implemented during that Democratic administration because Putin suspected that Biden would have a major issue with that, major beef with that.
Okay.
But now that, Putin believes he has an ally in the form of Donald Trump, that the U.S. will not mind. And that is quite clear now. I mean, the U.S. has basically made it clear that Ukraine is not going to get the land that Russia currently occupies in a peace deal.
Yep.
The defense secretary, Hegseth, said we have to have a realistic outcome, right? So Putin knows, okay, that's fine. So, of course, in an area that Trump probably doesn't even know where it is, on the map of Africa, he doesn't think that the U.S. will give him any flack for that. So that is why this deal is now being concretized at this particular time in history.
Okay, I mean, when I highlighted this part, there was a question that came to me. And the question was, how does Russia's military presence in Sudan, compared to all other powers, influence matters in Africa?
Well, in a weak setting like that, it can actually be very significant. I mean, if tiny UAE can determine the course of history so significantly in Sudan, Russia certainly has much more military hardware and can redirect it in a different direction.
Correct.
I think if you're willing to make a deal like that, it means the Russians would probably help, as I said earlier, the military secure victory in the civil war, even though Burhan, the U.S. has said, Burhan also engaged in what could be
considered
characterized as war crimes.
Yeah.
He has not been officially designated, unlike the leader of the Rapid Support Forces.
Messi.
Yeah, General Hemedi, who has been designated, so that the Russians say, they rationalize and come to the conclusion that the negative political flag that they would
have
sustain
by
supporting the military is worth the risk. I think that's what they've concluded. Plus, if you defeat General Hemeti, it means they would be able to control the gold field, which is the region that is currently under the control of General Hemeti.
That is interesting.
Yep. And now, instead of UAE being the big player there, obviously, it would be Russia now in control of the gold.
Okay. Mm-hmm. One final piece. Where is it? Yes. It's here. Last April, Russia Deputy Foreign Minister Mikhail Godunov visited Sudan and pledged uncapped support for its army. Russia has also backed Sudan at the UN Security Council, where it vetoed a resolution calling for a ceasefire, a move the UK Foreign Secretary David Lammy called a disgrace.
Right. Okay. Now it tells you clearly the hypothesis that I had suggested. Because if you agree to a ceasefire, then you cannot be seen helping the army to secure victory in this civil war. So now it all adds up and it makes sense. They oppose the ceasefire because the ceasefire would prevent them from implementing what the Sudanese army probably wants, which is to pursue this war until they have a victory on the battlefield.
On the battlefield.
Right. So it's likely that we will see an escalation. Perhaps maybe they've read something that, you and I don't know, that the rapid support forces may have some vulnerabilities. Maybe Russia will help the Sudanese military secure the airspace. I don't know, because if they secure the airspace, then obviously they cannot continue doing business with the UAE, and they would be cut off from their sustenance. So that's a possibility. I'm just thinking outside the box. If I am the Sudanese military, what would I want the Russians to do for me? I would want you to help me prevent General Hemeti from being able to fly gold to UAE. So help us secure our airspace, right?
Okay.
Obviously, help our ground forces. And a ceasefire would be a big obstacle for that, right? So it looks like they already have the main thing that they wanted, which was to get Russia to veto the ceasefire, paving the way for a military engagement.
I mean, as if that region has not seen enough bloodshed.
Right. But ironically, there could be people that might be saying, you know what? If we see significant bloodshed escalated for the next 2-3 months, if it ends in 3 months, it's probably worth it. I'm not saying that's my position, but I'm saying there are people who are probably calculating that this thing has gone on since 2023. Going on in April would be 2 years now of immense suffering. If this new deal can end the war within the next few weeks or months, I'm sure there are many people who would prefer that than seeing another 2 years,
Yeah, I mean, anything for Sudan. Sudan being one of the largest countries on the continent has experienced untold bloodshed since
the most renowned intelligentsia. You wouldn't believe there's a country that's produced so many intellectuals. You just look at what's going on right now.
I mean,
but that's the irony with many African countries, by the way.
Yeah, some of
and that's why the media narrative, the media portrayal of Africa is very important. So we get to remind people how Sudan is not the Sudan you see today, which suggests that once they have peace, they will be able to restore Sudan. I remember the Lebanon of back in the day. Nobody would believe that Lebanon would ever come back again.
Of course.
I'm not saying Lebanon doesn't have problems, but compared to the Lebanon, where you had like a different militia controlling every block back in the day, right?
And the only way a prime minister could be changed was through assassination.
Absolutely. And they had one after the other, So things are possible in Sudan because they have one of the brightest people on the whole African continent.
Okay. Speaking of brightness, it seems as if corporate interests in Europe have been trying to, I don't know what to make of this story, but it harks back to the transatlantic slave trade. Oftentimes than not, they will go into the archives, someone would discover that they've got a letter that indicates certain things transpired, and all of a sudden, everybody starts pointing at each other person whilst three fingers are pointing at them. So this story, the next one comes from The Guardian, and essentially it reads, British shipping firm used enslaved workers in Caribbean after the abolition. Studies find. Postal Museum says research featured in new exhibition shows how global postal service was tool of empire, and the story is filed by Larry Bakary. A British shipping company that became the largest in the world at the height of empire continued to use enslaved labor after the abolition of slavery, researchers found. The Royal Mail Steam Packet Company, which received a royal charter from Queen Victoria in 1839, used enslaved workers on the tiny island of St. Thomas, which was a Danish colony at the time and is now part of the British Virgin Islands. Slavery in the British Empire was abolished in 1833, but the RMSPC continued to use enslaved laborers on St. Thomas, its main coaling hub. The laborers had to use dangerous gangplanks to unload Welsh coal imported onto the island. Would you want to say something?
Okay, so the timing, look, because I just read and I'm reviewing this for one of my classes, actually. I have two versions. Let me see if I don't see the hardcover version, but this is the soft cover version of.
I know that was the book you're gonna. That's it there.
And slavery.
Yeah, Eric Williams.
Right. So we are informed that after 1833, Emancipation Act in Britain, Britain continued importing sugar produced by enslaved Africans in Brazil and Cuba. So, why are they picking on this one entity when the entire British establishment continued collaborating with slavery? You see? But, so we needed to be like part of a broader story. And part of the problem is, of course, when you focus on this, then people are like, well, lo and behold, we didn't know. How dare you? And then you realize, wait a minute, if the whole British establishment, government, was saying, okay, no more import of sugar produced by enslaved Africans in the Caribbean, right? But we're going to continue doing it. Importing from, and that's why the timing of this article that you are reading is because I just finished reading for the second time this book yesterday in order to review it. And that's how I'm able to counter by, saying, for example, you continue importing from Brazil, you continue importing from Cuba, you continue importing slave-produced cotton from the United States.
Yeah.
Because Britain was the global clothier. Britain was providing the clothes for the entire world practically at that time.
Correct.
It was a lucrative industry, you were not willing to succumb to. And that is why this book's thesis are all very relevant, and all the hypotheses that he suggests, he verifies them and confirms them. He said racism, he said slavery begat racism, not the other way around, right?
Yes.
And he proves it by showing that the first people they enslaved were indigenous populations in the New World. And then when they were dying, too many of them, by the European diseases, they literally enslaved fellow Europeans, indentured servitude, right? Even kidnapping them from prisons in the United Kingdom or from the streets. Even children were kidnapped. So they did that. And then at some point, the third peoples introduced were enslaved Africans. So he proved his rationale that, racism came after slavery, because now they needed to rationalize why they're kidnapping Africans. The second hypothesis, he also proves that the wealth generated from the Caribbean enslaved regime is what really built industrial capitalism in Britain. And then his third hypothesis was that, yes, the work of people like Wilberforce and all those other folks was significant, important, but it was not the critical decision that led to the abolition of slavery and emancipation. It was actually slavery was now becoming an encumbersome to industrial capitalism. So the industrialists no longer wanted slavery. It was costing them, actually. And he proved that by showing that after you eliminated it in the Caribbean, you actually continued dealing with slavers, Cuba, Brazil, the United States.
Okay, I'll continue. And it reads, slavery in the empire. Okay, I've read that part. Joanna Espin, a senior curator at the museum, said the research shows how the Global Postal Service and its connected companies were a tool of empire rather than a communication source. She said by steaming its ships outside the British Empire, where slavery hadn't been abolished, the RMPSC was able to exploit slave labor on the island. It's a complex story, but we're trying to show the choices made by the business and the way the company benefited by exploiting slave labor. What is complex about it?
There's nothing complex about it. Liverpool, Bristol, Glasgow, they wouldn't exist without the slave economy.
Plymouth.
The shipping industry never would have boomed like that. Metal producing industry would never have, boomed like that had it not been for it.
Yeah. In fact, Bristol owns its existence singularly to the transatlantic slave trade.
Mm-hmm.
Can you imagine that?
Yeah.
So, yeah. I mean, so it's like almost you're living with a tale, but then people want to look the other way.
Yes.
Go on.
Yes. No, I'm just agreeing with you.
Yeah.
So it's very similar to the South African story.
Yes.
Presenting a story while avoiding the bigger stories that are out there, Keep it localized so that the people's thinking can also be kept localized, you see?
Yes. There was a book that came out during COVID titled The Interest, and it just sort of works on the thesis in Capitalism and Slavery titled The Interest, Michael Taylor. And basically this runs through how all the establishment claimed compensation from the state for enslaved Africans to the tune of about 25 million back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not talking about, just your average Joe. We're talking about establishment, the church, some banks. In fact, Lloyd's of London is on record as saying, if you go on their website, it's even still there, that yes, we would like to, make our peace with our role in the transatlantic slave trade, and contribute towards understanding what people can, how they, just sort of wanting to paint a better story. But then my people we are sort of fixated with headlines and we run off with the headlines instead of focusing on the bigger story. How was this thing able to be done on such a global scale? And yet, fast forward, a couple of 100 years later, 200 plus years later, it's as if it never happened.
Yeah. Yeah. But that's why, it shows the importance of having these types of conversations. So, for example, in the this updated edition, I think is from, let me see, 1994 of the book, which was originally published in 1944, of course. It says, in the 18th century, when the slave trade was the most valuable trade, and West Indian property among the most valuable property in the British Empire, the triangular trade occupied an important position in the eyes of the rising insurance companies. In the early years, when Lloyd's was a coffee house and nothing more,
Yes.
many advertisements in the London Gazette about runaway slaves listed Lloyd's as the place where they should be returned. The earliest extant advertisement referring to Lloyd's, dated 1692, deals with the sale of 3 ships by auction. The ships were cleared for Barbados and Virginia. Only project listed at Lloyd's in the bubbles of 1720 concerned trade to Barbary and Africa. Lloyd's, like other insurance companies, insured slaves and slave ships and was vitally interested in legal decisions as to what constituted, quote, natural death, end quote, and, quote, perils of the sea, end quote. You see?
I mean, it would be funny if it wasn't sad.
Yeah. No, the day of reckoning will come. You see? The conversation as you know, in recent decades have become much more serious and intensified when it comes to issues of reparatory justice, right? People forget, in the 1960s, as it became clear that at least formal official segregation would come to an end, what happened in the South? What kind of reaction did we see by European Americans?
Lynching.
Or at least elements of European Americans. They went insane, correct?
Yes.
But they could not stop the march of history. Is America at the right location? Of course not. Is it the same location from the 1960s? Of course not. The answer is no. So why am I saying this? I'm saying this because some people mistakenly think, because right now we have Elon Musk and Donald Trump coming out with insane statements on a daily basis, that is going to be the permanent state of affairs. Far from it. Number one, I don't even think the relationship between Trump and Elon Musk can survive 4 years. 4 months, maybe. But 4 years, absolutely no, it's not going to happen. I wouldn't be shocked at some point if Trump isn't talking about deporting Elon Musk. Right?
To where,
so
though?
I say this for people to not think that the gains that we have secured up to this point is all going to be wiped out because we have a moment of reactionary politics. That happened. We had reactionary politics in the 1960s. To some extent, it was overcome, not neutralized. It keeps making reappearances at different stages. It made a reappearance after the election of Barack Obama, right? So it was sort of like a backlash. But that backlash is not a permanent location because history is not static, right? Yes, Trump comes, Trump goes, and we shift at some point to a slightly better location. And that's my prediction, you see?
Okay, I'll just end with this part here and get your take on it. In 2023, The Guardian launched a Legacy of Enslavement program and its award-winning Cutting Capital series, which, I enjoy people to actually go and look at it. It points at how the royal family and lots of institutions within the UK benefited from the slavery economy. The Bank of England, the Lloyds, the insurance Lloyds, the royal palaces, the National Trust, Kew Gardens, the Church of England, and the University of Cambridge have all launched inquiries into their own slavery connection. However, the Postal Museum said it was not planning any reparations as part of the project.
So now, this is a good question, because that shipping company went bankrupt at some point.
Yes, it did.
But it was taken over by the British government.
Mm-hmm.
So the question now is the British government now obligated then for compensation and reparations for those people that continued to provide enslaved labor after the Emancipation Act of 1833? That's the question that was not addressed in the article.
Again, like I said at the opening, that most of these organizations talk about what transpires, but you find that because they also have skin in the game, as it's called, they're not able to offer substantive declarations. The Guardian is involved. It's found that one of its owner also bought into the Manchester Millry. So when you were talking about the cotton, Manchester was the city that dealt in cotton. Actually took that off Liverpool, which is why one of their key rivalries in sports and everything is between those two cities in the north. But again, with Guardian knowing that it also has soiled pants, it's highly inappropriate for it, to then say, oh, you did this, you did. So everybody is on bated breath, as in, what's going on here? Oh, this is what you did. Oh, this is what I also did. Well, can we come to some sort of terms? So what do you think?
But at least the Guardian is looking at its past. The New York Times has not done a similar project. Like the New York Times did not even want to have anything to do with my book, which clearly exposed their role in demonizing and vilifying Africans, you see?
Yeah.
And then they had the hypocrisy to do a very long article when the Kansas City Star apologized for demonizing African-American citizens of Kansas, the state of Kansas. The New York Times did a whole long article about that. And then when I said, wait, I wrote to the publisher, said, wait, it's a good thing you did that long article, but why this would be an appropriate occasion for you to now acknowledge your own
role,
demonization of Africans. No response. But stories like this, you cannot suppress it. It will eventually have a wide audience, you see? So the Guardian was very smart in getting ahead of the game.
Okay, to the final story again. It's not a game, but, companies have had their stuff thrown at us. And for this story, we go to the BBC. And it's titled, Oil Cleanup Scam Warnings Ignored by Shell. Whistleblower tells BBC. You can see oil, the oil spill there. A BBC investigation has uncovered allegations that energy giant Shell has ignored repeated warnings that a controversial cleanup operation of oil-polluted areas of southern Nigeria has been beset by problems and corruption. The multinational, headquartered in London, along with the Nigerian government, has repeatedly stated that the work to clean up oil-contaminated sites of Ogoniland, which kicked off about 8 years ago, is going well. But BBC has discovered evidence that they were warned repeatedly over several years that the scheme set up by the government and funded by various oil firms to the tune of $1 billion, about £805 million, has been suffering from a string of issues. The allegation comes as a civil trial is expected to begin on Thursday at the High Court in London, where lawyers representing two Ogoni land communities of about 50,000 inhabitants will say Shell must take responsibility for oil pollution that occurred between 1989 and 2020, allegedly from its infrastructure. The community said the spills have left them without clean water, unable to farm, fish, and created serious risk to public health. What
Yeah,
else?
I mean, this is such a tragic story that we're still talking about the Ogoni tragedy today.
Yeah.
Decades, we're talking years after the
Assassination
brutal murder of Ken Saro-Wiwa, But, I mean, that's the only thing they recognize. These are lawsuits, right?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, there's a possibility that they could settle so that the information is suppressed, right?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
I wouldn't be surprised if on the day that the lawsuit is supposed to begin, the trial, that we're going to have an announcement that it's been settled, That's what they normally do, because then the evidence there would be no need for the evidence to be aired out in court, you see?
And for it to go on record. And for it to go on record, yeah.
But definitely, I mean, this issue needs to be resolved, once and for all. And, of course, the problem, of course, also is that, our governments, because the government has the trump card, right, in terms of saying we're going to halt any production on environmental issue grounds until this issue is resolved.
Correct.
And, of course, Shell would make sure it's completely resolved within a matter of, few years, completely cleaned and, I don't know to what extent you can completely clean it, but at least do some serious amelioration, correct?
Correct, yep.
But the government will not ever do anything like that because the government wants the revenue. And, as far as the government is concerned, compared to the revenue, the lives of the Ogoni are expendable. You see?
Wow.
So that's why it's a tough situation. I mean, they'll get some money. They'll probably get some money from Shell just to appease and buy some more time. Because the cost of total cleaning is probably, obviously they have the money. And they have,
they do.
Suppose they have insurance as well. But they don't want to go there. So rather than spending hundreds of millions, if they can settle for like
a quarter of that,
20, 50 million, that's like, chump change for them. And that's could well be what might happen.
So what about the clean?
Because the law firm wants to get paid too.
So what about the cleanup?
The law firm does not want a protracted lawsuit that goes on and on and on, because they can't get paid unless there's a settlement, correct?
Correct, yeah, correct. So which means the people will be left holding the can then?
Absolutely. I don't see it coming to, I can't see the court making a ruling that would bankrupt a UK-based publication, corporation.
Multinational.
I would be shocked. It could happen, but I would be highly surprised, right?
Yeah.
There are too many shareholders. Everybody has the finger in the pot somewhere. So only a heavy ruling and fine or intervention by the Nigerian government could guarantee that there's a sufficient cleaning, which would cost probably a lot of money, and which should be actually done. Because obviously that kind of damage is not going to be permanently confined to the Ogoni region. I'm sure its impact has been expanding slowly. It said 1989, so we're talking 36 years.
Yes, yeah.
In fact, what needs to be done is tell us how far the impact has now reached, beginning from its location in the original source in Ogoni. I would not be surprised if it spread to other regions in Nigeria.
The fact that it's even robbed people of their daily lives, their source of income, even their health is at risk.
Right.
From various cancers.
Right. And obviously you do that in a country like Nigeria. There's oil production in Canada, right? Canada is one of the leading producers. I don't think there's an Ogoni region type devastation in Canada. No.
I mean, when the Valdez went down in 1989, 1989, in Alaska, the cleanup was massive.
Yep.
So
because you're affecting even fisheries, the environment and the fisheries that are going to be consumed by Americans. They won't have that. So at the end of the day, it comes back to our weak and caring government. I mean, they care, but they care for the wrong priorities, which is revenue from Shell.
Wow. So, as we wrap up, we've come to the end of another, hopefully very informative episode. If this is your first time here, do like, share, subscribe, and, do all the nice stuff. And yes, I should also say thank you to a couple of super chats last week. Was when I got the notification, it was, okay, somebody values what we're doing. And yes, thank you. And yes, keep it coming. It helps to, keep the channel alive. Brother Milton, thank you again for coming through, as usual.
My pleasure, comrade. La lucha continúa. The struggle continues.
Yes, and
we want to leave a better Africa behind us. And the ones that come behind us, we want them to keep leaving a better Africa. And we'll get there.
Correct. In the words of Robert Sobukwe, Africa is humanity and humanity is African. I say thank you very much for everyone for coming through, and see you next week. That's a wrap for this week on the African News Review Podcast. We hope you are leaving with a clearer, more truthful picture of Africa. Remember, every story has another side, and we're here to uncover it. Don't forget to join us next Sunday at 12 p.m. Eastern as we continue to challenge the narratives and reclaim Africa's voice. If you've enjoyed the show, be sure to subscribe, share, and leave us a review. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep seeing Africa for what it truly is.